Hi everyone, this is Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you a round of horror reads focusing on books that are either coming out very soon or possibly come out already, depending on when I'm posting this. One of my favorite things about my booktube channel is the ability to read new releases and report back and basically hopefully help you decide which books are worth purchasing, which books are worth ordering from the library. And I have a really great group here. I am so excited to share with you this group of books because there's some favorites in there, and I just think that September is a really strong month for horror, and let's just get into it because I got some good stuff to talk about. First, I want to talk about The Ghost Tree by Christina Henry, and this is set in a small town, and at the beginning there is a grisly murder. Two girls are found beheaded and their bodies are pulled apart in the yard of a woman. And so the story is actually told in multiple perspectives, one of course being the police officers investigating the case, but most of the story is told from the perspective of two other teenage girls. They were best of friends growing up. However, at the beginning of the story, you find out that they are starting to grow apart. They used to always get together at what they called the Ghost Tree, this special tree in the woods. And now one of them is kind of losing interest in that. They don't really want to play in the woods. Instead, they are growing more interested in boys. They're starting to develop, and you get to see how their friendship is changing and being strained by those changes. And the story is also told from the perspective of one of their mothers because their young son is possibly seeming to predict things that are going to happen. And you get different perspectives of different characters that are seeing visions of these girls, the ones that were beheaded. And so there's a bit of a paranormal aspect to this book. Some of the characters appear to have powers, and there is a possible witch angle to this book. I want to mention that because I know that will appeal to a lot of you. At the center of the story, it really is a female coming-of-age narrative. And I've always been looking for a horror story that is centered around coming-of-age stories that are from a female perspective. I have been recommended several other books which I have read that supposedly fit that bill, but for me they just didn't scratch the itch that I wanted. And so I was incredibly delighted when this book really did work for me. This book is set in the 80s, so like a lot of coming-of-age stories, you definitely have that nostalgia factor, but what made this book so special was that female-centric narrative, because you're dealing with things that are very true to a female growing up. So getting your first period, having that relationship with your childhood best friends change and often fall apart, as well as just how your body develops and growing an interest in boys and changing. And so much of this book just rang true to me and felt very personal. So I love those aspects to it. This book is one that I would highly recommend to anyone who enjoyed Imaginary Friends by Stephen Chbosky. It's definitely not the same plot, but there were a lot of similarities. You get a mother-daughter or mother-son relationship where there is a strain of finances, and you're getting to see their relationship as it develops, and also that possible paranormal element with a child that might have special powers. And this book was just gripping. I will admit that I don't actually think that the writing was the strongest, but the plot made up for that. I was just immersed in the story. It pulled me in. I was feeling a little bit slumpy before I picked this up, and this was very much the cure. So if you're looking for a story that will just sweep you away, this is definitely one to check out. It's perhaps not the most innovative story. It was fairly predictable. You do get to find out that the town has secrets, and you find out what those secrets are pretty early on, and you just kind of know who the bad guys are. It's not something that's necessarily going to surprise you, but regardless of that, I still just enjoyed going along for the ride and seeing the story unfold. Even if it didn't blow my mind, it was just such a comforting read, and I really enjoyed it. So if that sounds like your kind of story, especially for those female readers out there looking for a very personal horror story, this is definitely one I'd recommend, and I just loved it. Next, I want to talk about a horror novella, and this one I received from Tor.com, And this story is The Night of the Living Dummies by Stephen Graham Jones. This was one of my most anticipated releases, and so I was very excited to check it out. This follows a group of teenagers that decide to pull a prank on one of their friends who's working in a movie theater. Something goes wrong, and the story basically spirals into a slasher story. I want to keep the synopsis really short, partially because it is a novella, so it's not a very long book, but more so because it's the kind of book that you want to go into without knowing too much, because the setup that I gave you is just where it starts and it goes to other places that made the book so amazing, but it's better to experience it for yourself. So I'm going to try really hard to sell you on this book without spoiling anything. For those of you that don't know, I've had kind of mixed relationship with some of Stephen Graham Jones' previous books, only because I am probably still first and foremost a plot reader. I've really come to appreciate good character work, good writing and all of that, but I can't appreciate those things without a plot that is moving forward with enough narrative drive. And so some of his previous books just didn't quite work for me, but this one did. So if you are someone who has had mixed feelings about his work before, trust me, you will enjoy this one. This one definitely has enough drive to move forward, but you also get all the things that make Stephen Graham Jones books so good, because he is a really literary writer. His character work is always fantastic. But what worked so well in this book is that it is so intricately plotted. There are just little nuggets in this book that just piece everything together, because this starts out as kind of a classic coming of age narrative, and then it turns into a slasher story, but not in the way you would expect. And I'm going to leave it there. And I just think it was so smart and fun, but there was enough depth to it. It was complex enough, despite the lack of pages, that it just left me so satisfied. So needless to say, if you're on the fence about picking this one up, just do it. Absolutely love it, absolutely recommend it, and definitely a new favorite of mine. Next, I want to talk about another horror novella, and that is Elegy for the Undead by Matthew Vesely. And this is another one that was on my most anticipated releases video. And this follows two gay men that have just gotten married, and they find out that one of them is infected with a disease that has very zombie-like characteristics. It's going to cause him to just lose his mind, become very angry and agitated, and it does have a bad prognosis. You know that he is going to die. And so this is somewhat framed as a zombie narrative, but I want to start by saying that this is the kind of zombie book that I would actually recommend most to people that don't read zombie fiction, because if you're looking for gore and guts and all of that, you're not going to get much here. This is basically a horror story that is used as a device to tell the story of a relationship between two gay men. And I definitely enjoy finding queer horror stories, which is the reason I wanted to pick this one up. And I did enjoy this one, but it was more romance-centric than the stories I currently enjoy, and so it wasn't quite up my alley, but I very much appreciated it. So this story basically recounts how these two men got together, how they met, fell in love, and it really shows the complications of their relationship once you bring in terminal illness, and you get to see them grow apart and grow together. So if you're looking for a story that is kind of a horror story, but really not, and is so much more about love, especially queer love, I definitely recommend this one. To my understanding, this is also an own voices story, because I believe the author is an openly gay man himself, and I just really appreciate that these books are out there. It just wasn't personally my story. And last but certainly not least, I want to talk about You Are Invited by Sarah A. Denzil. This is a story that is a piece of contemporary horror that is set in our very modern day, where there is a woman that works as an indie published author, and she gets an invitation to go to what is called the event, and it is this big event basically happening at this old haunted mansion where a bunch of social media influencers are getting together. They are going to film everything and have it live streamed online, and they are going to get patrons and other people to support them financially in this endeavor, where they are basically going to put themselves up for public display. They are going to show their different crafts. One is a video gamer, as I mentioned, the main character is an author, and you have a makeup guru, etc. And all of them are coming together for this big event. They want to get the exposure and the money, and the main character is excited for this opportunity because she really believes that it will enhance her career and help her to become more financially stable. And so she agrees to go along. Right at the beginning of the story, you get to find out that the mansion that they're living in has a bit of a history. There were nuns that were living there and they all died. And so it's a question of, was there some kind of haunting? Was there a ghost, possibly vampires, or what really took place? And I thought the author did a really good job of setting up that premise and creating a beginning that felt very atmospheric despite how incredibly modern this book is. If you don't know, I'm a huge fan of contemporary horror that mixes together social media and modern technology, so I was very excited for this one. Of course, as a booktuber with a Patreon platform, I am someone who is very much involved in this culture, so this book definitely spoke very personally to me, and I really enjoyed those aspects. I think it's always a challenge in horror to make a book scary when you are including things like Facebook and Instagram that are just so modern, and it's just a lot harder than if you give a book an old kind of gothic setting. So I actually think despite all the technology, the author did a good job of that setup. For me, where the book lacked was the fact that once you get into the meat of the story, the middle of it, the relationships or the drama between the characters kind of went to the forefront, and I felt like the book lost its way a little bit and just became a little bit too much about the interpersonal drama. I did appreciate that the main character was schizophrenic, and I felt like the mental health aspect of that was handled fairly well, but of course was used as a plot device to create the idea of, is the character seeing things or are they actually there? And so you kind of have to decide for yourself how you feel about that representation, but it definitely made for an interesting piece to the story. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know how it was going to end. Honestly, the ending was a bit unsatisfactory for me, but I am getting pretty picky when it comes to endings, so keep that all in mind. Otherwise, I did enjoy this one. I thought it was really interesting, really fresh, and just really different than other horror books I've read, which I've said so many times is just the theme of this year, is I just want horror stories that are different and a story I haven't read before. And this was definitely that. I think for a lot of you that are familiar with Sarah A. Denzil, she's written a lot of popular thrillers like The Silent Child, which I really did enjoy. And while this is a horror book, I would describe it as a horror thriller because it really did read more like a thriller from most of the book. Again, where it's more about the characters not trusting each other and you don't know who's telling the truth. So if you go into the book kind of expecting a thriller but with a horror twist, I think you'll be pretty satisfied. It was a fun read, really easy to fly through, and just an immersive story from beginning to end. So I definitely would recommend it if that premise sounds up your alley. If you enjoy really modern horror, this is definitely the next one to check out. So that is it for this video. Let me know of the 4 books I talked about, which ones are you most excited for, and what other books are coming out towards the end of the year that are the top of your reading list. I am so excited now that we're getting to the Halloween October season. There are just a lot of good books coming out, and I have a lot of good videos planned, so I hope you are going to stick around. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing, and otherwise drop a comment, give me a like, hit that notification bell, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, bye-bye.